Thank you so much for attending this weekly virtual training from AFM. AFM volunteers are happy to provide this training to you. You are encouraged to share what you learned from this training with your colleagues. This training is provided free of charge and does not include a certificate of attendance at this time. The training will be recorded, and when possible, recordings will be available at AFM's YouTube channel for future viewing. Since this is a 1-hour training, we will start with training and we'll invite you to introduce yourselves using the chat feature in Zoom. At the end of training, AFM's fire safety advocate, Jose, will be hosting a tea time, and you are invited to stay to network and ask further questions about the training topic or to discuss other pertinent topics to the fire service. Please make sure to mute your microphones, and if you have any questions, you may unmute yourself to ask. Now, Jose will get us started with words of encouragement. Thank you, Jose.
Thank you so much, Shandy. I truly appreciate being here. And thank you very much, Mr. Howard, for joining us, and also everyone else in the meeting. So today we are going to read from our normal book, 90 Days of Encouragement. This is volume 1. And we're going to dive right into day number 48. It says dying to self. It's written by international board member, Mr. Keith Helms. And I read, greater love has no one than someone lay down his life for his friends. That word comes from John chapter 15, verse 13. And I read more. These words are often used by firefighters to express their willingness to sacrifice their lives at a fire. And this is noble thought. This is a noble thought. Anytime a firefighter dies at the scene of fire, we should see that as self-sacrificial act. We should see that as a self-sacrificial act of love. However, I think that the verse may actually be speaking about a different concept of laying down your life that is actually more difficult. In John chapter 15, Christ was describing to his disciples the picture of him being the vine and the followers being the branches. The branch relies on the vine for everything and can do nothing without the vine. Christ then spoke of the love between him and the Father, and he encouraged them to join in with this love. That is led to the words of verse 13. Consider the possibility that Christ may be referring to the call to die daily to self. The same thought is presented in Luke chapter 9, verse 23 to 24. Then he said to them all, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will save it. Well, I'm not suggesting that dying at a fire is not an act of love. I'm suggesting that a greater act of love is to die to self daily. This means that you willingly set aside your own desires and need for good of others. This is what Christ demonstrated in his birth, death, and resurrection. Paul wrote about this in Philippians chapter 2, verse 1 to 11. If you want to be a disciple of Christ, you must die to self. You must set aside your own desires and seek to serve Christ. This is how fruit is produced. We, the branches, trust completely in Christ, the vine, to provide all that we need, which enables us to focus on others. We are the fruits. Is dying at a fire an act of love? Absolutely. Is that the greatest act of love? Consider the greater act of love may be to die daily, to live as Christ lived, to love humbly as he loved. To me, This is much more costly death. Instead of being honored in the world, it is actually discouraged. The world suggests that you take care of yourself first. Christ suggests the opposite. We are called to die to this world, live for the next world, and to live a life that reflects the image of Christ while we are here. While you may not receive the praise of others in daily dying to self, you will receive the pleasure of the Lord God Almighty. Whose praise are you seeking? Well, today's encouragement speaks more of dying to self. Every day, you must be able to die to self, thus being able to follow Christ in his ways. You know, it's always said that everybody calls us heroes, but can you really consider yourself a hero if you've not considered Christ? It is actually a point for us to actually die to self daily and always depending on Christ. So I'll say a short prayer, and then I will let Mr. Howard Cohen go ahead. Let's say a short word. Dear Heavenly Father, we say thank you for today. Thank you for the opportunity of life, and thank you for the opportunity of learning. We ask of you that you guide us even through this process, even as you make the internet become smooth for us to be able to focus in this class. We thank you and we bless you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Mr. Howard, we are really grateful to have you, sir. And I would ask you to take it forward and show us what lesson we have today. Karibu sana.
Okay.
Welcome, sir.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Howard Cohen. I'm the Deputy Chief of the Bennington Fire Department. It's a 100% volunteer department. I've been in the fire service for about 20 years. I actually joined the fire service. I was invited to become the department's chaplain. So just as a bit of additional cross-cultural experience, I'm actually a rabbi, which I trust you know is a sort of the equivalent of a priest or pastor in the Jewish community. So I first started out as a chaplain, and what I did say, I would do it on one condition, and that is that they would let me become a firefighter, an active firefighter, and they all said sure, and so that set me on the path through Firefighter 1, Firefighter 2, Instructor Fire Course 1, and many, many hours of training and rising through the ranks to my present position as the Deputy Chief of the department. So it's interesting that the reading that you did, Jose, had talked about death, because everything that I want to talk to you about today has to do with trying to prevent death of firefighters and, of course, citizens who were serving. Of course, I understand you were speaking in a spiritual and theological sense, and but just as a matter of perspective, everything we do when we're doing training in the fire service is about the preservation of life, which is, of course, without our lives, we can't really offer the full praises to the God that we worship. So life is, of course, crucial. In today's course, I want to go back and cover what probably, maybe, hopefully, were some of the basics that you studied at one point in your fire career, but I think it's really worthwhile to revisit. There's also been a lot of research here in the United States in the last dozen or so years that has helped us to understand fire dynamics in a new and expanded way. And I want to share some of that information with you. But I need to tell you, I'm not an engineer. I'm not a researcher. I'm a firefighter who's doing, everything he can to improve his knowledge. And so I am sharing what I've learned from other presenters, and I hope you'll find it useful. Just give me one quick second. I need to do something. I'm back. My cat got locked into the room where I am. So basically, I want to cover 4 topics in this morning's talk, or this afternoon's talk for all of you, this morning's talk for me. The first is I want to go back to the basics and define fire and talk about what is fire, what constitutes fire, and simply put, how do you put fire out? I know that sounds real basic. After all, you all been firefighters for any number of years, but it's worth revisiting the basics. You know, when I was in fire school, 18 years ago, I remember one of the things I remember from that class is one of the instructors said, you know, about 5 years after you're in the fire service is when you're at your most dangerous. And we were all like, really? We would have thought 5 years in, we're getting closer to being on our game. And he said, no, 5 years in is when you get cocky. And, you know, when you first come out of your fire training, you got all this information, it's fresh in your mind. But the reality is that we don't really fight that many fires. And so to keep it all fresh, you got to keep drilling. And of course, we all know drilling is time consuming and sometimes it's not all that exciting. And so he says, by the time you're done 5 years, you've seen a few things, you've done this and that, and you think you know it all, and that's when you get dangerous. So I'm kind of hoping that this going back and touching some of these basic skills is a good refresher for those of you who've been around for a while, and for those of you who are new in the fire service, to reinforce some points. So in addition to defining fire, I want to talk about the mechanics of heat transfer, because ultimately that's what we have to be concerned about when we're in a fire environment. It's the transfer of the heat into our uniform, into our turnout gear. It's a transfer of heat that moves fire around a structure. So we want to talk about heat transfer and how that happens. The third point is a point I'm going to just keep reiterating throughout this presentation, and it's one that is so easy to forget, and that is smoke is fuel. When we see smoke, we have to think that not as, oh, there's a sign of fire, but we have to look at that and go, there's fuel for a fire. And I'm going to show you some videos that just will bring this point home to you. Even though I'm sure you all sort of at some level get this, it's still, it's one of these things where you gotta hear it over and over and remind yourself, smoke is fuel. If there is smoke there, then fire is not far behind. So the fourth point is I want to talk about fire flow. And what we've learned now from the research that's been done by some of the organizations here in the United States that study this is how venting, opening, bringing air into a building can really change the environment rapidly and dangerously. So we're going to talk a little bit about fire flow. So with that, I'm going to begin and dive in. So a little definition for you. Fire dynamics, that's what we're talking about here. Fire dynamics is the study of how chemistry, fire science, material science, and the mechanical engineering disciplines of fluid mechanics and heat transfer interact to influence fire behavior. In other words, fire dynamics is the study of how fires start, spread, and develop, and I should add also get extinguished. So here's a little, put your answers to this question in your chat. What are some reasons for why it is important to study this subject? So feel free to write an answer or two into the chat, and if I see things coming in, I'll put them up here. In your opinion, why do you think it's important to study fire dynamics? Either based on your experience. So anybody wanting to put a chat, respond in the chat. Oh, there's some chats. Nothing on the subject yet. Nope. Keep that in mind. So I'm going to ask you questions throughout this. It's not a test, but feel free to respond if you'd like to. So here's the 3 big reasons why fire dynamics is critical. Number 1 is to keep ourselves safe, which incidentally means keeping our fellow firefighters safe. Number 2, it's to save lives. If not ours, then those of civilians who are caught in the fireplace. And number 3, it's to save property, which this is what it's all about. And that's why we need to understand fire dynamics. After all, as firefighters, we're fighting fire. So if we don't really fully understand who our enemy is in this regard, what it does, what it can do, what makes it angry, what makes it calm, we're not going to be able to do these three objectives. As I put out in here in red, if you don't understand the dangers you face when you're fighting fires, you won't know if or when you are in real danger. That's what it boils down to. So, moving on. Once again, I want to ask if anybody's prepared to offer up an answer. And you could actually unmute yourself and call out the answer if you want. So, what exactly is fire? Any guesses? Any offerings? Definitions? What is fire? Are you guys going to make me do all the work? All right, fair enough. I'll wait another little bit longer. Somebody's probably trying to get their courage up to yell out an answer. Yeah, I know. 20 seconds of silence seems like a forever eternity. Okay, so no takers. I was warned. So here's what fire is. Here's the definition of fire. NFPA stands for the National Fire Protection Association, I think. It's kind of I may have not totally right, but NFPA is the body of all the guidelines for what we do in the fire service here in North America. So here's your definition. A rapid oxidation process, which is a chemical reaction resulting in the evolution of light and heat in varying intensities. Now, light and heat in varying intensities is a fancy words for saying fire. All right, here's another definition. Fire is an exothermic chemical reaction that emits heat and light. So it's something happening outwardly. It's a chemical reaction. There's going to be light and heat from it. By the way, I don't know if you've come across this term in your training. The chemical reaction is known as pyrolysis, and it's the decomposition of the compound in one or more other substances by heat alone. In other words, when you put a piece of wood in the fire and it starts to get brown and then maybe starts smoke coming off of it, that's pyrolysis. That's the chemical reaction changing the composition of that wood or whatever it is if you're in a fire, and causing it to get hotter and let off gases, and which will eventually turn into flames. So here we talk about what we call the tetrahedron. It's a 4-component pyramid that makes up fire. So I'm going to skip through this one with the blanks on it and go to this next page. And this is what the tetrahedron is. In order for there to be fire, you have to have fuel. Fuel is anything that can potentially burn, including smoke. There has to be O2, oxygen. The more oxygen you have, the hotter the fire is likely to burn. You've all been sitting around a fire, and you want it to get bigger. And so it's a campfire or cooking fire, and you want it to get bigger. So you blow on it. You blow on the fuel. It causes more heat, more fire. What's happening actually in the relationship between the O2, the oxygen, and the fuel and the heat is this chemical reaction. So that's why it's now called, we don't think of this as a tetrahedron, a 4-sided way of four components to what makes fire. So if you see at the top, I have a formula up here in purple. Fire equals fuel plus oxygen plus heat plus a chemical process. Sometimes the chemical process is what causes the heat, which then leads to the fire. So it's not necessarily in that particular order. And for certain materials, it produces its own O2. So there's certain metals that when they're burning, they actually produce O2. So it's not the external O2 that becomes the problem. So when the chemical decomposition is taking place, and that piece of wood or that couch in the chair in the house or that table in the house is beginning to move towards flaming, you start to see some color discoloration happening. You'll start to see smoke coming off of it. And that's the chemical process breaking down the elements, the components of that whatever's there, turning that into creating heat and creating smoke until it ignites. So when the byproduct of this pyrolysis is the smoke or a charred wood or fire, when all this is happening, it's also releasing chemicals like hydrogen cyanide, HCN, carbon monoxide, dioxins, furans, formaldehyde, and many, many more really dangerous chemicals that are in that smoke product, and which are also, by the way, flammable because smoke is fuel. So, moving on. Here it is again, the tetrahedron. Fuel, oxygen, chemical reaction, heat, that's what fire is. That's what produces fire. Take away any one of these four elements and the fire goes out. And fortunately for us, water generally works on all four elements to put the fire out. So if you take away oxygen from a fire, it goes out, or at least dies down, right? If you cool the environment, there's less heat absorbed by what's going on, by the fire that's there. Less heat slows down the chemical reaction, makes it harder for the fuel to change and turn into fire and produce fire. So any one of these affecting any one of these things is how we put fire out. Get rid of the fuel. You can do that. Well, one reason why we want to cool the room down and get rid of the smoke is because smoke is fuel. So fortunately for us, water works great, and in a lot of places we have plenty of water. I know I was watching on the Facebook page, one of our colleagues was teaching kids how to smother a fire, and they put a cloth on top of the pan that was on fire. I actually sent him a message. I said, "What kind of cloth are you using?" And he explained it was just a wet cloth, but it's perfect. Why? It's wet. It cools things, and it suffocates the fire, takes the oxygen away, puts the fire out. So it's a great, that's what fire is. It's worth remembering because we can forget about this. And this is why when you go into a burning room, you want to wet the walls. You wet the walls because it absorbs less heat. Absorbs less heat, it's less likely to be hot. And that gets us into heat transfer, which is where I'm going next. So heat transfer is one of the major factors in the ignition of a fire, the growth of a fire, the spread of a fire, and indeed the decay and finally the extinction of the fire. Heat always transfers from the hotter object to the cooler object. That's just physics, right? That's just the law of physics. Heat always transfers from hotter object to cooler object. Which, by the way, if you look at my note on the bottom in color, you are always the cooler object when you go into a burning building. So the heat is going to want to go to you. You got to keep that in mind because heat transfer is a big concern of ours. Heat energy is transferred to an object. When it's transferred to an object, it increases that object's temperature. And the heat energy that is transferred from that object and then decreases the object. So never mind, don't worry about that. So when heat is transferred to an object, it's going to absorb the heat. You've seen the pictures where there's a fire and it's in a room and fire is contained in one small place, but it's getting hotter and hotter. And then you see maybe there's a sofa or a chair in the room and it starts to show letting off the smoke. It's absorbing the heat. The more heat it absorbs, it's going to get to a point where it reaches its ignition point. So, heat transfer. Here's how heat is transferred. Conduction. Heat is transferred within solids or between contacting solids. Convection, heat transferred by the movement of liquids or gases. And radiation. Heat is transferred by electromagnetic waves. So heat, here's a couple of some examples of these things. Conduction. You put a piece of metal into the fire. You're holding on to the end that's not in the fire. The heat is conducted through the metal to the end you're holding, and now the end you're holding is hot. That's conduction. Convection is when the hot air moves through, or water is hot and moves through. Maybe in some of your buildings you have steam heat. So you put hot water in pipes and it runs through the house, and that transfers heat. And radiation, well, radiation is one we all experience all the time on a hot sunny day. You're standing in the sun, you want to get out of the sun, that's radiation, you get in the shade. We'll talk a little bit about how each of these three ways also affect the fire environment for us. But I want to reiterate, I want to remind you, I want to say this again. Heat is always transferred from the hotter object to the cooler object, and in the fire environment, you are the cooler object. Just remember, don't forget that. Okay, so you're crawling through a burning building. Here's an example of conduction. Everywhere where this firefighters is touching the ground, heat is passing from whatever, from the floor, the carpet, the wood, whatever, it's passing through to the firefighter, because the firefighter is the coolest thing there. So when you have your turnout gear on, you know how turnout gear works? Everybody knows turnout gear works by having all these different layers between you and the outside. And each of those layers is designed to absorb heat. And by also creating some air space in there. So if you press your gear down when it's hot, you're just pressing something hot against the skin, which is why if your fellow firefighter's gear catches on fire, you don't want to put it out by patting it with your hands, because now all you're doing is pushing the burning material up against his or her skin. You want to hose them down. And it's why if you come out of a hot situation, maybe you're doing a live burn, a drill, or you're caught in a fire situation. You come out and you want to, pat your fellow firefighter on the back and say, "Hey, good job." Well, if you press down, you pat them, you're pressing down, and you're causing the conduction. You're losing the barrier that's keeping conduction from happening. So that's conduction. Here's the fire. There's the firefighter, cool firefighter crawling in a hot room. Okay, next example, convection. Air is blowing in. So his backside's nice and cool, but the heat coming off the fire is rolling hot air over the top of this firefighter. So that's convection, because the hot stuff going above. So as you know, when you go into a burning environment, you get down on your hands and knees, or you duck walk. Why? Because the hot convected air is flowing across the top of the room, because hot air is going to rise. That's what it does. That's the physics of it. So that brings us to radiation, which I've talked about a little bit already, but here it is. It's coming off in all the directions. The closer you get to the fire, the more you're going to feel it, because you're getting closer to the source of radiation. Quick example, I already mentioned this. The sun is radiating energy. When we're directly in it, of course, we feel it. And so that's as clear an example of what radiation is all about. I want to show you a quick video here. It should come up. We give it a second, just to hear someone else talk about this stuff.
Radiation. You're crawling in a fire room. Even you are away from the fire, your gear will heat up to a certain extent and you will begin to feel heat. This is because heat is being radiated from the hot flames to you. This mode of heat transfer is called radiation. Sun is a great example of radiant energy. If you want to get away from the sun's radiation, what do? You step in the shade. Same principle applies to fire. Convection, on the other hand, is caused by the movement of gases or liquids. For example, a cool summer breeze gives you immediate relief on a hot day because of the convective heat transfer between air and your body. Now let's consider a fire where you are crawling in a fire room with the door open. You have fresh air coming through the door, cooling you off, while the hot gases are going up over your head and out the door. When this layer drops and you are in the hot convection flow, that will heat you up. At the same time, you will also get a small amount of radiant energy from the hot gas layer causing your gear to heat up. When you touch a hot surface, you get burned. This is an example of heat transfer via conduction. The same firefighter in a fire room feels heat on his hands and knees. This is because heat is being transferred from the hot floor to the firefighter by conduction through his gloves and gear. Remember, the rate of heat transfer is directly proportional to the temperature difference between hot and cold surfaces. So, if you are in a fire with a modern fuel load that creates more heat, it is going to transfer heat to your body very rapidly.
So I don't know what your houses are like and what the buildings are like where you are, what kind of materials you have. Here, where I live, we have a lot of old buildings, which means there's problems with them because it's old wood and it's the balloon style construction. But almost everything inside these buildings is some sort of carbon-based, oil, a plastic kind of based product, which has tremendous amount of energy in it. And so it burns very hot and it burns very quickly. So all these, the heat absorption factor is intensified by the fact that there's this heat, potential heat energy being converted into fire. So I want to talk about the flow path now. We all know that hot air rises. You sit around a campfire and the smoke goes up. You go into a burning building and it's cooler on the bottom and hotter on the ceiling. In your houses that if it's really hot, the upstairs part will be hotter than the downstairs part. So hot air rises. That is just the nature of that's the physics of it. And when it rises, it also expands. So I won't read this, the technicalities of it. You could see it while I'm talking. So, but from our point of view, the flow path in a burning building is where the air is coming in and the air that's getting hotter and building up with pressure is going out. So you have going in and going out. High pressure always goes to the area of low pressure. If that's hard to get your head around, I think this next slide will make it pretty obvious. You got a tea kettle on the fire, right? You're heating up the water. The water is, because of the physics of the way the molecules move around, it's building up pressure, and that pressure's got to go someplace. So it shoots out of the tea kettle as steam, and it's whistling, right? Or it's making some noise. That's a steam engine. That's what goes on inside of a burning building. The air pressures are building and building and building, and then it has to go someplace. And it's looking for a place to get out. And it's always, high pressure always goes to low pressure. So you come up on a building and you see smoke coming out around the door. Well, what does that tell you? It tells you that there's air, the pressure is building inside there. If the pressure is building inside there, it's getting hotter. It's getting hotter. It means it's getting there's fire or it's getting ready to blow. So you got to remember that there's this whole flow thing going on. This becomes really, really important when you're talking about how am I going to fight this fire. So you get up, you come to a building and the doors are closed, the windows are closed, and there's fire inside because you've seen evidence of it. There might be smoke coming out from between windows, or there might be, you might see some discoloring of the windows. So you know there's fire. Maybe whoever was there, you know, reported there was fire. But it's not blowing. It's not flames all over the place. Well, if you go in there and the first thing you do is open up the door, you're letting in air. And when you let in air, you're going to blow the fire up. So we got to think about the mechanics and the timing of when we open up a building, because once we open it, it's going to get air and it's going to get hot. And if we don't cool it by having water, we're making the fire worse. We had a situation here in my town a while back where an apartment building, no smoke detectors, a couple of animals inside. I think they had 4 dogs and a lot of fire load in this apartment, a lot of stuff in there. They had something on their stovetop and it caught fire. Well, it was smoldering, I should say. It was building up, and nobody was home. The neighbor saw something was wrong because he could see the smoke kind of building. And what did he do? He went in to rescue the dogs. So he kicked in the door to get the dogs. And as soon as he kicked it in the door, the apartment building went up in flames. Perfect example of you have to watch the flow path. So that brings me to 2 kinds of flow, of fire flow in a building. You can have unidirectional or bidirectional. It's important to recognize this when you're doing the firefighting, because you've got to pay attention to the way the winds, the air is affecting things. And as soon as you walk into that fire, you're going to change the environment because you've opened the door so you can go in. Which, by the way, it used to be you might go around and knock out all the windows because you thought, well, let's vent the place, that'll let all the heat out. Well, actually, all you're doing when you do that is feeding the fire. A whole lot of really good science has gone into rethinking the whole venting process. Now, rule of thumb, you do not vent a building until you're ready to put water on it. And you got to do it in a coordinated attack. And that's a whole different training that can be done, the whole notion of doing venting and entering and searching a place. But for our purposes, you've got unidirectional flows, which is air coming in and it's going to go out. So you got to have an outlet for it. That's the flow. So you're a firefighter, you don't want to be coming into this space where the air is going out, because that's like trying to be Santa Claus and climbing down a chimney that's got a fire in it, right? You don't want to be doing that. Or if you don't want to go into a basement down the stairs if you don't have to, because that's where all the smoke is looking to get out. And remember, smoke is fuel. That means that anywhere there's smoke coming out someplace, it's potentially fire. You don't want to be in that fire. So smoke is fuel. What is fuel? Energy. What is energy? Potential heat. What is potential heat? Fire. The other kind of directional flow is called bidirectional. That's where you have cool air coming in and hot air going out someplace in the same, like you have the same space here. This is the same, the doorway, right? So here you flow in from a doorway, but out from a window. It's pretty dramatic if you have a chance to see some of this research that's been done. But I was watching a video of an apartment building where this unidirectional flow thing caused fire to move maybe 100 feet down a hallway and then out the window into the room and out the window of an apartment that someone left the door open. So unidirectional flow. Bidirectional, cool air comes in. It's always going to come in on the lower side. And then the hot air is going to go up on the top side. This creates this green line, which is called the neutral plane. And that shows you where the line is. If we were to be doing a workshop on reading smoke, you could learn a lot about where the seat of a fire is based on where the neutral plane is. But we're not going to go into that right now. We don't really have the time. So I'm going to play another little video for you. Give me a second here to bring it up.
A good incident action plan involves an understanding of where the fire is located and where it is spreading. Fire gases and heat will move from an area of higher pressure, typically where the fire is, to an area of lower pressure. This path of smoke and heat spread is known as the exhaust portion of the flow path. In a structure fire, a flow path exists between the fire and an area of high pressure and any adjacent room, hall, stairway, open door, or window that connects to an area of lower pressure. During fire suppression, firefighters have the opportunity to take advantage of how water streams can alter this flow of smoke and heat. In some instances, it is advantageous to alter the flow. For example, during an interior attack, when there is a vent opposite the advancing hose crew. In training as much air as possible with the hose stream creates pressure that can push the products of combustion ahead of the advancing crew. In other instances, for example, during an exterior water application, it can be more effective to cool and knock back the fire using streams and nozzle handling techniques that limit air entrainment and pressure buildup. This limits the impact on the flow path and allows the exterior vent to continue to function as an exhaust vent. Flow path and fire suppression must be thought of together. Knowing how and when to alter the flow path makes for a more effective and safer fire attack.
Okay, so remember, I've been saying over and over that smoke is fuel, and I want to show you two short videos before we wrap up that bring this point home. One is a video of something you could do at home to demonstrate this to other people. So let me show you this first video. Did you see what happened? Let me play this again. So he's got a candle, right? His lit candle. He's going to blow it out and then take a match, a lit match, to the smoke and watch what happens. Did you see it jump? The flame goes back. That's the flame, the smoke catching fire and going back to where. All right. That's just a reminder. Smoke is fuel. And here's another example of it. This one's more graphic.
Yeah, go.
Now let me make it big. I want to make this larger so you can really see it.
Yeah, go.
See all the smoke coming out? It slowed down a little bit so you could see it. That's very hot smoke coming out of this. He takes the. The reason why I keep coming back to this, reminder of this. Let me get rid of this. There we go. Why I keep coming back to this notion, smoke is fuel, is because that's what this is all about. It's how to manage the fire. So if you see a lot of smoke, pour water on it because it's going to cool it down because it is a combustible product. So just to wrap up everything, that the main points, this is kind of a checklist of things to remember. If you want a screenshot, take a screenshot of this as kind of a, flashpoints, that's great. But remember, heat is always transferred from the hotter object to the cooler object, which means you in the fire environment. There's two kinds of flow paths, bidirectional and unidirectional. It's really important to be aware of that when you go inside of a burning environment. so that you don't find yourself suddenly caught in the pathway of all this hot smoke, exhaust smoke coming out. I mean, you would never want to stand behind a jet engine taking off. That's bidirectional, that's unidirectional, hot stuff going out, and you don't want to be there. Airflow is always high pressure to low pressure. That's basic physics, and you know that, all that intuitively. And remember, smoke is fuel. Fuel is material that stores energy, and smoke is fuel. So smoke has a lot of energy that's waiting to turn into fire. Water is the best way we have for absorbing the energy and heat that results in fire. So that means wet stuff down. I don't know if you guys are using water enhanced systems, which is a fancy way of saying foam in your water, but tests have shown that using foam mixing your water with these foaming agents keeps the products keeps the combustible things that are wetted with this combined water foam stuff wetter and cooler longer than just water. Here's something that we could do a whole other workshop on too, and it's called controlling the door, which is mainly what this boils down to is controlling the airflow path. Because once you as a firefighter go in the door with your hose line, you're creating a pathway for air. So you don't want to feed the fire just when you're trying to put it out. So controlling the door, learning to start thinking about how do I control airflows is really important. And lastly, from the second to last tactical thing I want to say, the first one was control the door. The second one is do not vent the environment until you are ready to cool it with water. That is the new gospel that's being preached here in the West in terms of firefighting. Do not vent until you are ready to cool with water. We now know that venting before you're ready to cool only makes the fire worse. And the last thing I want to share with you is a thought that I learned from Kurt Wagenbach, who's a retired Vermont state trooper. Let me just tell you the background real quick where this comes from. Kurt responded to a really, really terrible call where sadly a mother who became mentally distraught drowned her two daughters and then herself. And he was the first on the scene and failed. He was not able to rescue them because she had taken them to a river and he went one way, but they had gone the other way, and it was something that nobody could have possibly predicted. And so he was just really minutes short of being able to save these two little girls. And it was just really devastating for him. And it actually became a very important teaching lesson in the whole realm of post-traumatic stress in terms of incidences. But I was at a presentation and he said this offered this thing, and it really resonated with me, and I want to share it with you as my final words, and that is, we don't rise to the occasion, we fall back on our training. Training is critical. We do not, I don't know about you guys, but here in where I live, here in the United States, we do not have enough fire calls to rely strictly on experience to make us as good of firefighters and as safe firefighters as we want to be. So it all comes back to we got to fall back on our training. We've got to know more, and that's what training is all about. So on that note, I want to put up this final thing. I don't know how much access you have to these sites from your from where you are, from your cell phones or your laptops, but if you can access these training sites, you'll get great information. One of the things that these places can do, this place called NIST and the UL for firefighter safety, is that they can take a fire that you went to and recreate it many, many times with different variations. Like you went to a fire and you approached it from the let's say the A-B side, and you thought that would be good, but you wondered, what if I approached it from a different angle? I did it a different way. You can't do that at a fire scene, but they can recreate the scene over and over in many different ways. And so as a result, we've learned a lot of really useful stuff, and it's kind of turned a lot of our firefighting here up over on its head. So friends, that's all I have to say. I give myself an extra 5 minutes for any questions and stuff, because I see that we started a little bit late. So if we can go on, I see there's some comments in chats. I don't know if there's specific questions. Can you guys, Shandi or Nancy?
Yeah, Howard, I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up, and then we will allow time for those questions.
Okay.
So
Excellent.
thank you so much, Howard, and to all of you for participating in today's training. We will be posting the recording online soon for future reference. We would ask that you complete our online evaluation so that we can continue to improve our trainings. Next week training is fire investigation awareness, and you will be able to use the same link to log on to training next week if you are able to attend. Please invite other firefighters to register and attend our trainings. Thank you, and remember, a better fire service starts with you.